Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another show of Mondays with Moshe. We are going 3.5 years strong. I think we're actually closing in on 4 years in just a few months. And the exciting announcement that I did not put up yet in the email, hopefully it'll come out this week, is that this past week we actually reached a milestone number of 1,500 members to the Mondays with Moshe group. So we've been flirting with it for many, many, many months. And we finally, we're in the 1480s, 1490s. The new students came in to the universities and they're like, could we join? And boom, this week we hit 1,500. So congratulations. Would love to see a hand clapping reaction somewhere from someone. But congratulations, Mondays with Moshe, 1,500 participants, which is really wonderful because for those of you who are here from the beginning, you might remember that the purpose, thank you, Sherry. The purpose of this show was to create a live forum where mental health professionals in the field get to interact with experts, with those who are innovators and contributors to the field of mental health, especially some of the great ones that are out there. And then, sometimes we just have good discussions amongst us to be able to really think together and process the process of psychotherapy. So again, it was really created not to share different modalities and teach different modalities. It's not a training program, but really to bring clinicians back to the awareness, back to the idea that there's a process that's happening in the relationship of psychotherapy, in the room, in the energy of psychotherapy. And that's really where a lot of the work and a lot of the change happens. Now, incidentally, I'm not saying this for nothing particularly tonight. I'm saying this because I'm hoping that tonight's discussion will revolve around that topic. We're actually sort of circling back to something we haven't spoken about in a year or two, which is the process of the psychotherapy process. And to seduce Eliane Rosenbaum and to get her into the show tonight, I wrote IFS on the flyer. But really, we're going to talk about the process of psychotherapy. Hi, Eliane, and thanks for joining. And let's see how you're going to bring this back to IFS. But seriously, our guest tonight is Dr. Angela Huebner from out in Virginia. And Dr. Huebner, tell us a little bit about who you are. I know you're the author of a book called Jailbreak, which has been quite popular. Tell us a little bit about who you are, how you entered the field, how you got into the IFS, EFT cult, and why we're going to talk about psychotherapy tonight. And tell us.
All right. Well, hi. First off, hi, everybody. Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm very excited to be here. I have been practicing in the field of mental health in one capacity or another for about 30 years. Most recently, I was an associate professor at Virginia Tech in their marriage and family therapy master's degree program. And in that, we, of course, supervised students. I was a major professor. I taught all those fun classes like research methods and statistics and everybody's favorite thing. I got into IFS back in 2008. It was introduced to me, and I got trained early on in IFS. But because of my position at Virginia Tech, I had the luxury or gift of being able to do lots of different trainings in the field. And I would bring those back and teach those to our students. So part of the intro classes, where you get to sort of sample all of the different kinds of therapy, I was well versed in all of them. But IFS really grabbed me. I have some advanced training in EFT, and I'm currently almost certified in EMDR. And so those are kind of my favorite. And I think those will play into what we're talking about tonight in terms of what are the mechanisms of change under psychotherapy. So the other part of what I do now, I left Virginia Tech and have been in private practice for about 7 years at this point. I'm in Northern Virginia, and I work with couples and individuals, mostly EMDR, IFS, and EFT. So I also do some consultation groups. I also do a lot of 1 or 2 or 3 day trainings with individual groups or agencies, particularly those that are looking for a little bit of an introduction to IFS. Especially because now those trainings are so difficult to get into, and it's so popular that people want to have a little more training, and they're not willing to wait. So that's a passion of mine. What else? The book that I wrote is called Jailbreak, and you can find it on Amazon. The subtitle is The Making and Breaking of Our Invisible Prisons, an IFS-Informed Escape.
So tell us about what is the book about?
Yeah, so the book is really it uses examples of my journey through IFS. It also a lot of case studies from clients. In here, it's a thin book. So the feedback that I've gotten is it's really user friendly for clinicians and clients, and there's worksheets that go along with it. But it really does talk about why we end up the way that we do, right? So part of my training is in human development. I have a PhD in human development, and having an understanding of how the brain works and how we get trained, how memories work, how those are formed, and then how those change the data we take in the world and what we're perceiving. That's kind of the first part of the book. So at Virginia Tech, I taught interpersonal neurobiology and IFS. But I was able to distill it in a way that I always like to say my grandmother could understand, because these are sort of topics that can freak people out a little bit. They can feel a little heavy, but I have a gift for translating it into something that makes sense. And so this book is really user friendly to help people get their head around that. And then it goes through the concepts of IFS and some application around that and kind of what the initial process is. So
Amazing. Yeah. So take a look at Jailbreak. I hope you said it's a thin book, but I hope it also has big letters.
Yes.
All right. So a thin book with big letters. That's what we like.
Yep, that's
yep. One of the things, a little confession here, a little self-disclosure. Those who know me know that I don't have a whole lot of patience for reading long books, even mysteries and novels. I don't read if they're very long. I'm like a bullet point guy.
Okay.
Bullet points, and that's what I'll take. I read the bullet points. It's one sheet, two sheets, and that the primers of the books and things like that. Okay, so thin books that will catch my attention. We promised to talk about the process of change in therapy, and but we also have a lot of IFS talk, and we have IFS interested people here. I want to know if we can start with just understanding. You said you had the perk of being able to train in so many different, if we call them modalities or forms of therapy or perspectives. Okay. And, the question that I would ask you is, how different are they really one from the other? So, there's a lot of emphasis or different emphases from one modality to the next. But how different is the work itself really?
I love that question. I would always say to my students, well, we have all these different perspectives because people need tenure and they have to get a book published. And so part of my interest is, what are the commonalities underneath those? So if one particular technique worked, that'd be all we had, right? So yeah, I don't think all of them. What I hope we're talking about tonight is what are the mechanisms of change that underlie all of these methodologies, right? And there's so much of them that are, first, what's the therapist's instrument? And then what are the particular techniques? But to me, the techniques are all in service of, what do you think the mechanism of change is?
Yes.
And how are you evoking that?
When you said that everybody has to be able to write a book, so I'm sure that you meant it somewhat tongue in cheek, and there's probably some truth to it. But I also think that besides that, there's probably also different ways that people take in and conceptualize the information. So I believe that it's helpful to have different perspectives presented, because there's going to be one that talks to one person more than the other. If you look at parts work versus IFS, I mean, how different is parts work and IFS? There's so much that's similar in that work. And
a lot that's different.
And a lot that's different also, but there's so much that's similar. The point that I'm trying to make is that there's a lot that's similar. Even Dick Schwartz, says that he didn't invent the wheel. It's really, we're taking things and we're repackaging them, but it's also important to be able to take them and repackage them. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. I want to invite everybody, as I always do, to raise your hand and ask questions or make comments if you'd like, by using the reactions tab on the bottom right of the screen. So feel free to do that. Okay, Angela, let's talk a little bit about some of the underpinnings I have my own, perspective and beliefs about how change happens between the therapist and the client, or how the therapist helps induce or
Mhm.
influence change. I'd love to hear, some of your thoughts on both the sciences and the arts in
Mm.
how you understand how people change in therapy.
Yeah, well, so initially, the what I want my students to understand is really how the individual changes. So there's, of course, what we evoke interpersonally, but intrapersonally, what needs to happen in our brain for our memory networks and our habits of being, how those change. And so I'm very influenced by Bruce Ecker's work on reconciliation theory. And there's no coincidence that the three models that I'm most drawn to, IFS, EMDR, and EFT, all prioritize emotion. And not that others don't,
Mhm,
but the research is pretty clear that we need Bruce's work, that we need enough emotional hit to make the neural networks malleable.
mhm,
In other words, if you think that our the way we interpret things, what we see is all kind of a template in our brain, if we're going to get into that and actually evoke change, we've got to be able to open it.
mhm.
And it's through emotion that we open that pathway. And then we can update it with new information, right? And then it goes back into long-term memory and it's fundamentally changed.
So just before you continue, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
I don't know that everybody here. We had Tori Olds on here who talks a lot about memory reconsolidation, has a really close relationship
Ah,
with Bruce. She
mhm.
has some great YouTube videos. But can you just, give a little introduction as to what
Yeah,
let's talk about how the early memories are formed, and then we
yeah,
can talk about memory reconsolidation, and then we'll talk, we'll move from there, just so that
right.
just so everybody's in on that.
Absolutely. Well, not to go into too fine a detail, but when kids are little, right, prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain isn't yet functional, and so the base brain and the limbic system are online first, and so Mother Nature drops us into the world and leaves a lot of room on the desktop, right, for how do we program this so that we can function optimally in whatever environment we're dropped into, right? So the lights are on, that's kind of the blood pressure, breathing, heartbeat, all of that stuff. But then the rest of our brain gets programmed, so to speak, via interactions with those people around us. And that's happening before prefrontal cortex is online, before we have words. So memories are being formed then. Memories are neural networks that fire together, wire together. You've heard that. Um, and the more repetition, those neural pathways get myelinated. And myelin is the fatty tissue that goes around those neural pathways that make them less malleable. They speed up the transmission of that, and those become our habits, right? Those become the pathways that are well worn. And given druthers, our brain is going to use the pathway that's already cemented. So that's how it starts. Once it's cemented, right? Once it's connected and myelinated, Mother Nature doesn't want us to be able to change it so quickly, right? Because then we'd have to relearn how to hold a fork every day, or we'd have to relearn how to ride a bike, or all of those things. So once it gets set, something pretty significant has to happen for us to change it. And what's the significant thing? Emotion, right? We code experiences when the emotional balance is really high or really low, right? So those are the things. You don't have to touch the hot stove twice. It myelinates in a hurry, right? It's I always say, if you think about how was your cup of coffee this morning, you're probably going to say, it was fine. It was a cup of coffee, right? Versus, no, it was the best cup of coffee I ever had. It was the worst cup of coffee. Like the stuff in the middle, we don't much remember. And so when you understand that about memory, you understand why it isn't willy-nilly changeable. So then how do you get in there and change it? We have to have the big emotion, a hit of emotion, and that makes it malleable. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah. So I mean, what I'm hearing you say is that's what wired together, meaning when
Exactly.
they were significant sort of shakeups, right? Then
Mm-hmm,
that's what
mm-hmm,
wired us
mm-hmm,
to expect, right? To habituate or to expect certain treatment or certain
mm-hmm,
interactions. So if we were hit with a lot of negative emotion, such as criticism or neglect or abuse or whatever, then we're going to sort of learn to expect that from the environment and, of course, adapt accordingly and create whatever coping mechanisms each person will create. And then in order to sort of undo that or learn something else, we have to be able to soften those wires in the brain and retwist them, return them into a different shape. And we do that when we create and induce the emotion.
That's right. So the neat thing about reconciliation is you can graft a new experience onto an existing neural pathway. So, right, if I can open it and add it, I don't have to start from zero to remake those connections, because you can also do that. It just takes a lot longer.
And
right?
is that what's happening, let's say, in psychoanalysis?
My hunch is that's what's happening in psychoanalysis. That's often what's happening in CBT. Like we're trying to diminish old networks and form new habits.
So what exactly does it mean that you can add them on? So now I have an experience of having been mistreated as a person and now being well treated as a person. My therapist treated me very respectfully, treated me very with honor and reverence. My parent and other authoritative figures beat me and hurt me. And so now I sort of have two. So how do I reconcile and know what to expect in the future?
So with EMDR and IFS, the change happens when, from the place of safety and security in the relationship with my therapist, let's say, I can have this new, corrective emotional experience. So I do have this pathway of connection and wholeness. From this place of safety, I need to open this other neural network that holds all of the pain and the trauma that hasn't been integrated with who I am now, right? That's the part of trauma we haven't talked about, but that those memories haven't been processed enough so that whoever had that experience can remember it was a bad thing that happened, but they're safe now. So part of the experience is from this place of safety. In IFS, we would call that witnessing as part of the unburdening process and the healing steps, right? We're gonna, from a place of wholeness, not traumatize, but be with this experience in a way that nobody was with that part or that person at the time. And that's how we start to make another pathway between past and present.
So that's going to enable the person to remember the experience without attaching to the negative emotion.
Right, without re-experiencing it. So they will process, experience, have a bit of a hit of the negative emotion, but because now they're in the presence of, from an IFS perspective, self energy and the loving energy of the therapist, they're having a bad experience, but they're no longer alone. Right? Because we know so much about the trauma work. It's not the thing that happened. It's how that thing was handled or processed, or the sense that the person was able to make out of it. Yeah. And so it becomes a very different experience.
Okay. Amazing. Does anybody have any questions or comments on that so far? I'm going to assume not until someone raises their hand. Okay. I'm just curious if we can digress for a moment or so. EFT, right? So
yes,
I know you're trained in EFT, and in the again, they have their whole language also. But when we talk about, let's say, couples therapy with EFT, so is the idea also that one spouse is creating a safer neural network, so to say, for the other spouse? Is there something so different that's happening, or is it sort of the same concept? Creating.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I think it's the same concept, but we're looking at, and this is a conversation between Dick and Sue, right? The difference is that secure attachment coming intrapersonally or interpersonally. And it doesn't have to be one or the other, but EFT would prioritize the interpersonal, where inter. IFS would start with intra, like I put my gas mask on first and then help the other, where EFT traditionally leans more toward partner is going to regulate me.
Okay. But wouldn't, isn't there something that's happening also
Mhm.
in the relationship between the therapist and the client that's also in some way facilitating
Yeah.
in other words, is it strictly intrapersonal, or is there a sense that the client gets from the therapist interpersonally, right, through that
Mhm.
relationship that's
Mhm.
also really helping to facilitate that?
Both, absolutely both.
So it's
Right.
not,
But in IFS, the difference would be that my job as the therapist is to facilitate the client's self-to-part relationship. So I'm also holding a container and facilitating, so guiding, leading. Um, but the relationship is between client and part
mhm, mhm,
versus EFT, you to me.
got it.
Yeah.
So I guess a difference would be that after EFT, a
Mhm.
person might remain as insecure with others that as they always were, but not with their spouse. They'll be more secure with their spouse,
Right.
in a sense.
In a
Technically.
sense, in a sense. And EFT does a lot, is doing more and more intra-psychic work also, right? So they're also looking at what's happening to me intrapsychically. So that it's not completely separate, but yeah, the emphasis is in that other direction.
Okay. So
Yeah.
now let's take a step away from IFS and EFT per se.
Okay.
Now let's go back to the original question or the topic of the night, which is
Mhm.
how do you really understand or conceptualize how people change through the therapeutic process?
So I think, go ahead. Do you want to talk first?
Mhm.
Okay, so we have, of course, the common factors models about, what are the common factors underlying good therapy. I think it is what we know. It's the relationship between therapist and client. Um, that's also why I'm a big fan of IFS or any of the models that say do your own work, because we have to be a clear instrument, right, for picking up what's happening with the client and being able to reflect that accurately. And I think all different models do that, of course, right? Countertransference, transference. IFS would talk about, am I in self energy or am I blended with a part? And so what I do a lot of training on as well is self of the therapist from an IFS perspective. So can I be a clear channel, so to speak, right? So that when I'm picking up what's happening, I know the difference of whether that's me getting triggered or if am I picking up something in the client's nervous system that I can respond to. So to me, obviously the huge is the relational aspect, but not just how are you doing today, but really am I clear so that I can pick up and reflect what's happening interpersonally between us.
So you're saying that the relationship is, this is what a lot of the research showed, right? That it's something in the relationship between the client and the therapist that induces change. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So now I have a couple questions about this, because this is something that I'm really trying to break down into to very clear conceptualization. We know from so many of the studies, and it seems to be self-reported by the therapist or by the clients, that something about the relationship has helped them change. But are there things inherent in the therapeutic relationship that we can sort of break down scientifically, even though again it's an art, right? But
Right.
that we can explain scientifically as to how the relationship helps people change? So you and I
Yeah.
have a relationship. Does that somehow make you change? Or is there something that's happening more subtly because we have that relationship?
I think it's what's happening more subtly. And the way I think about it is really the attunement. And attunement in that sense means I'm tracking with you, right? That we've got a prosody going. I'm able to track what's happening with you. Um, and I'm picking that up. When you're with somebody that's tracking you, that has that attunement, right, which is one of the hallmarks of great child development, having an attuned parent, the client's nervous system can relax, right? So just in being in proximity, in relationship with somebody who's centered, grounded in self energy from an IFS term, or just very centered, it's calming. And once client's nervous system isn't in fight or flight, right, isn't in that constant state, automatically they've got room for growth,
Mm,
right? We can't change if we can't grow and protect at the same time. We can't be in survival and
fascinating.
open up to something new. So just in that, I'm very much into that piece of it as well, just the physicality of it. Yeah, and the
Right, so
attunement.
you're presenting a little bit of a new, I guess, perspective that I
Mhm.
haven't seen it. I'd never seen it in this way. But you're saying that the attunement somehow enables a relaxation, calming of the system of the
Mhm.
nervous system,
Mhm.
and when the person is calmed, then presumably so much information that they already know can settle in. Like I might know how to
Mm.
rethink something or restructure a cognition.
Mhm.
But when I'm frozen, you can't put it into an ice cube. You
Exactly.
could drop it into water, right? So when I'm thawed out or defrosted, so to say, because of the relationship and that calmness, then I become a greater receptacle to either something that you may share with me as another human being or as an expert,
Mhm.
or something that I already know but I haven't been able to incorporate.
Exactly. Exactly. Because, right.
So
Yeah.
tell me how it is that your attunement, Angela, your attunement to me, Moshe, right?
Mhm.
How does that make me calmer? But I just feel so unsafe in the world. So how is it that
Yeah.
you being attuned to me makes me calmer and that enables me to be a receptacle?
So the attunement is part of the relational piece too, right? So as I'm coming in and attuned, um, it's ventral vagal nervous system energy. So now we're incorporating polyvagal theory, right? And what we know about where we're at in the vagus nerve system, right? So if I'm in ventral vagus nervous system energy, smart vagus, right? So that I'm in that open place.
You want to just
Um,
give us the three,
yeah,
the, go ahead. It's just for a moment, describe the three parts of the polyvagal
yeah.
system.
Okay, so polyvagal theory works with the autonomic nervous system. And so we have the sympathetic nervous system, which is, the traditionally gas pedal. Vagus nerve has two forks, right? So one is ventral vagal, which is from diaphragm up, and the other is dorsal vagal, which is diaphragm down. So dorsal vagal, where it's digestion, elimination, that's sort of where we slow down and play dead, right? That's the hypoarousal. Ventral vagal is all of those micromuscles in the face, the voice, prosody, tone, all of that is part of the ventral vagal nervous system. And we're through our mirror neurons and that vagus nerve, our parts of our brain are just tuned in to little micro movements. And is it safe or not safe? Are they thinking about something else? Are they actually present in the room with me? So that vagus nerve is really critical. And once you start to understand that, you have to get your own house in order, right? I can know about polyvagal theory, but if I'm not sitting in that energy, the client's going to pick it up. So does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so again, I'm going back to that question in my mind,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is, so now you've attuned with me. I
Mhm.
can feel that you're calm,
Yep.
and I can feel that you're calm, Angela,
Mhm.
even when I'm not calm, even when there's something chaotic going
Mhm.
on inside of me, right? I
Mhm.
can feel that you're calm with my chaos.
Right. And that helps you, right? In this work, that would help me help you get curious about the chaos, right? Can you notice you're feeling chaos even as you're also feeling the safety and security of this room?
Mhm.
Right. So now we're kind of pendulating back and forth a little bit.
It's like the antithesis of projective identification, right?
Mhm.
If I were to be anxious and chaotic and that would cause you to react to it, then it would sort of inform me that my chaos is a problem and I need to continue to be chaotic and continue to be defensive. But
Right.
if you're not identifying with my anxiety, my chaos,
Mhm.
then there's some message in the room that I needn't be freaked out or panicky or chaotic about my chaos.
Right. Right. And then the art is, can I help? Do I have enough of a relationship so I can help you feel like trust that you can trust my view, that it is safe, or that you can trust that feeling? Because it could, if you didn't have that relational aspect, it could feel like I'm not believing them, or right, like I'm not taking them seriously or something like that. So that's where the art comes in.
You're just, okay, that's one part of the art. Okay.
That's one part of the art, of course.
Where, so if you're, let's say, aloof, let's say, or disconnected, or and certainly if you're downright dismissive, then the client will sense that and will not be able to regulate. To the contrary, they might actually become more triggered.
Right. And we know from a lot of the research that if, for example, people are in a depressed state or an anxious state, they're going to evaluate a neutral face more negatively. Right. So in the absence of data, if I'm being totally neutral, I'm going to get a negativity bias from them.
Dark lenses.
Yes. Yeah.
Bring through dark lenses.
Yeah. So I really think we can't underestimate this as the instrument.
This as
us. That's the instrument. Us, the therapist. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, okay, is there more to how you experience the process of change than that, or is that pretty much the nuts and bolts of it?
I think it's that part, but then it's back to what I talked about with the reconciliation theory. How do we help the client go into these? And then how do we help them integrate? And then the third piece of that then is how do we help them learn or remember the competencies they might have missed as developmental nutrients, back in the day. Maybe so we could say maybe they don't know how to set boundaries. Okay, so now we need to learn that, or maybe they don't know this particular skill. So the third piece would be, okay, now how do we go back and pick up whatever competencies you need that because you were in survival mode you weren't able to get.
So is that through straight up teaching, or how does that work?
It could be through straight up teaching. It could be in EMDR, we talk about finding a mastery resource. So let's say, for example, you think, so now I want to go into this new situation with my boss with more confidence, right? So then the invitation would be, can you think of a time when you felt really confident? So like you were tapping into a neural network that's already there, even if it might be in a different context. Okay, so now can we pull that feeling and play it through in your mind's eye to the new one? So we're trying to graft, right, an existing thing. So that's one, you can find a competency they already have and repurpose it to a new context.
Okay.
Or you can have brand new experiences, psychoeducation.
Well, one of the things that I wonder is in enactments and reenactments. That's another way of learning these concepts. So really a relational approach to psychotherapy would be really to explore what's happening in the relationship. So, I don't know if you remember, but when we spoke 3 weeks ago, I had said something about, I had asked you a question about why you have your arms folded. If you notice that you have your arms folded during the session, and you said to me something to the effect of, why do you think, what's wrong with having my arms folded? Right? Now I don't remember that I was commenting that there's something wrong with having your arms folded, and I noticed that you experienced that I was somehow saying that there's something wrong with that. I was just, I felt like I was being curious about that. So if we explore interpersonal experiences that the client and the therapist had over the course of their time together, right? And then reevaluate them, then that could, I believe that can be another way where clients can learn new information. So in other words, they could learn how to be assertive by us reflecting on things that happened throughout the course of our work and what was assertive or what could have been assertive or what should have been assertive as well.
Certainly. And that enactment piece is a huge part of EFT, right? So the therapist actually helps the couple do it differently in the room with some coaching. So absolutely.
Okay. Any questions or comments as of yet?
There's something in the chat. It looks
something in the chat. Yeah. What was that? Shadowed by word building community.
Oh yeah. Wow. Somebody did a Google.
Or someone knows your work.
Or someone knows my work. Yeah, at Virginia Tech, I had the first study in the country on the impact of military deployment on adolescents. So this was back in 2004. And so subsequently I did a lot of work with military families around
So meaning
Iran,
children, you're talking
Afghanistan.
about children of people deployed?
Yes,
Okay.
US military, yeah. So yeah, so trying to look at community capacity. What a great question. Can she share advice for those of us working with families involved in the war in Israel now? Yeah, I would love a little more specifics about the work, because like the work that we did with families was how to create community support for the military families that were left behind, and how to do it that way. So I don't know if that's what you're referring to. Maybe
Maybe you could elaborate, Yoel, you could raise your
yeah, that'd be
hand.
great.
So Angela, I want to share something with you, a
Mhm.
thought about the therapeutic process. Those people who've been on Mondays with Moshe, kind of
Mhm.
know this about me and my conceptualization, I think. I think I'm curious to hear your thoughts, but I think that a lot of the change that happens when we talk about the relationship is in the new unchartered form of relationship that the client experiences from the therapist. So just the fact that they're being treated differently than they'd been treated in the past. The fact that, like we were saying earlier, being treated with respect, attunement,
Mhm.
interest, curiosity seems to have the capacity to repair so much of what was neglected or damaged in earlier years, and for the person's
Mhm.
formative years.
Mhm.
And to boot, or certainly above that, is then to process what it feels like for the client, what they're noticing in the relationship between the client and the therapist. It seems to take on a life of its own when they can realize, hey, wait, I am worthy
Right.
of being treated this way, and I must be worthy because someone's treating me this way and is finding me interesting and delightful and wonderful and
Mhm.
respectable, right? So how much does that play a role in in your conceptualization and what you're describing?
Oh, I think it's critical, but I also don't think it's enough. I mean, I think they absolutely have to have a new physiological experience, right? And new meaning making. But then we have to help them go back and recognize, clear out the beliefs they came to believe about themselves because of these other experiences, including, so much of the work I do with folks is about whose responsibility was it, back when they were kids. And
Mhm.
so kind of it's not that I'm not enough, it's that I was being asked, for example, to do things that were way above my pay grade as a 6-year old, like and so helping them make sense of, okay, I'm having this great new experience now with my therapist, but all this bad stuff happened too with people that were also supposed to love and really care about me.
Mhm.
So what do I do with that? So I think that's the first piece, but then we have to help
Mhm.
bridge those two.
So could you give me an example without
Mhm.
using, let's say, IFS
Mhm.
terms, because it's going
Sure.
to use me, the lingo. But can you give
Mhm.
an example? Give a case example. Walk us through a case example of somebody who struggled with issue A, came to
Mhm.
therapy, and then
Mhm.
what the process of therapy did to open them up and help them. That's sort of tough. I mean,
Sort
if you're
of,
prepared for that. I'm just
um,
thinking of some books that I read and how they kind of walk you through a client case study.
yeah,
So
yeah,
tell us, or just even a
yeah,
concept.
absolutely. Yeah. So when I think about case conceptualization, right, if we're just going to walk through, I think about there's a difference between what the symptoms are that the client's coming in with. I'm feeling anxious, I'm depressed, I'm ruminating, I can't sleep, whatever those symptoms are,
Mhm.
versus what's underlying, what's the problem that these symptoms are an adaptation to.
Yes.
So that's the first piece of the way I think about case conceptualization. So then we would talk about, in the way that I work with clients, we would talk about um, the different ways they show up or the different strategies they use in the world that maybe worked at one point in time and aren't working anymore.
And I just want to say, like, every single form of therapy, well,
Mm-hmm.
besides the behavior, I don't know about the behaviorals,
Mm-hmm.
but most modality of therapy have some term, some terminology, some word to talk about the idea that what seems to be maladaptive or negative behaviors are really your friends and your protectors, and helped you to adapt, and you want to respect them. I think every single form of therapy across the board acknowledges that and recognizes the value and importance to make space for that, and have the client respect that part.
Agreed. And I think that's so critical because
Yes.
these now it turns to self-compassion. And once
Yeah.
there's self-compassion, now we've got some room to move.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I always say that the three steps or the three parts to therapy are self-awareness, self-compassion, and then the last of the, where we want to get to is self-acceptance. And if we can create enough self-awareness and self-compassion in that relationship context, then we'll eventually bring it to self-acceptance, and then anything's possible.
Totally agree. Totally agree. So then in the way that I work with clients, we're going to go through and look, whether it's through an IFS lens or an EMDR lens, what were the experiences? What were how did you come to learn how to do this adaptation? And then we walk it back from there, right? So here's whatever adaptation you learned. So for example, oh goodness, I just had, this is fresh because it was today. I had a client who worked in hospice, and her growing up, she wanted to come process a lot of all of the death, right, that she's been exposed to, and creating bereavement things for the therapist that she works with. So the problem was not being able to be present with her family because all this noise is back there about worrying that something's going to happen to them. Right. So we were able to, when we started saying, where did this adaptation of trying to make it better for everybody else, but not attending to you, right? It's not okay for me to be upset. I have to be strong for everybody else. And in fact, that's my calling card, is I can handle all of this stuff, right? It doesn't flush me. She initially thought about it as this was my role in the hospital. And as we look at it, she was able to trace it all the way back to, my parents never talked about death. There was no room for any of us to have any negative emotion or even talk about any of that. So I learned as an adaptation not to talk about it, not to need anything, to help everybody else, that kind of thing.
And she didn't turn into a therapist?
She is a therapist, actually.
She is a therapist.
Yeah. I have a lot of therapists in my practice.
No doubt. I mean, that's the profile, right?
Right.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how are we going to work her through memory reconsolidation? How are we going to attain memory reconsolidation and openness and all of that?
Well, so the first part in this particular case, in the first part of it, we already have a relationship because we've worked on and off for a while. What we started doing was looking at the parts of her that didn't want to look at this. Like, what would it mean if the parts of her that didn't want her identity to be anything other than kind of unflappable, and what that would mean if she were unflappable. And that's where we pulled back to all of these. This is where I learned that it wasn't okay for me to have an emotion. I would say lose my bananas. Like, I learned early on, it wasn't okay for me to lose my bananas. So that gives us a target for future sessions to reprocess some of those childhood experiences.
So clients would say, okay, so we've identified, this is what we get a lot in psychodynamic work or analytic work. So I've figured out precisely where that adaptation comes from. I recognize that that's how it had to be when I was a child. I still can't seem to break out of it.
Right. Well, so then either using IFS or EMDR, those particular techniques, they focus on this is lighting up three different parts of the brain. So in IFS and EMDR, we're saying when you think that thought or find that part, where do you find it in or around your body? In other words, what's the sensation? Right. So now we're looking at base of brain, right? The mind-body connection. So I've lit up that part of the brain. Then we talk about how do you feel toward it, or what emotion comes with it. Now we're lighting up limbic system. And then we go to what are the thoughts you're thinking? What do you say about yourself when you're feeling that? So when we set it up, we're lighting up all three parts of the brain, if you think about the triune brain. And that gives us access to make that network malleable. right? So now I've got the emotion, I've got the thing I say to myself about it, and I can feel it in my body. So that the feeling it in your body, wherever you feel it, gives us a point of focus. And now we're back to what you focus on, what you focus on wires together. Where attention goes, energy flows. So if I'm focusing on this sensation in my body, and I've got a cognition, and I've got the emotion, boom, now I've got some malleability. So now we're in there and
We
we
have the
can,
5 hour memory reconsolidation
Mhm.
time slot. The time's
Right,
ticking.
that's right.
What do we do in those 5
Well,
hours?
we've only got 50 minutes in the session, so we gotta move it. Right. We're saying, can you let yourself feel? Like in EMDR, it's can you notice that and let's see what connections your brain makes,
Mhm.
because the brain wants to heal. In IFS, we're saying, what does this part want you to know? So in both cases, we're looking at what's in that memory file.
Mhm.
And it's coming out. Either the client's talking about it, or they're feeling it, re-experiencing it with in the safety of the relationship.
So it's telling me that it's not safe for me to take care of myself because I have to be on call and on guard all the time.
And from the safety of this place, what do you want to say to it about that? Adult you to 8-year-old you. What do you think she needed to hear that she
It
didn't hear
really
then?
is safe. It's just not safe right then.
It wasn't safe then. Yeah. And so we're trying to in all of these, and I know I'm cross talking both models, we're trying to make past present connections,
Mhm.
because what happens to us is we get hijacked into the past. And meaning when we have that same, either the same emotion is hit, or it hits right that shame cycle, or those tender areas, we narrow right back into the resources we had
Mhm.
when that memory was formed. So in that moment, I may only be able to access my toolkit that I had when I was 11,
Mhm.
right? But if I can have that memory network open and connect it to the toolkit I have at 56,
Mhm.
right now, this one's not alone anymore. And we've started to create that pathway.
Beautiful. So the same thing that, I'm just thinking that technically
Mhm.
this can be very cognitive, right? We can say, well, at the time you were at the time you were in danger, or it felt like you were in danger, and today you're not. But what you're arguing is what I think contemporary work is arguing is that no, we need to create a visceral
Right.
or experiential, emotional experience in which we can then do the recreation or the
Absolutely. That's exactly right. That's exactly, because otherwise we're staying in prefrontal cortex, and this is what we know. Our clients tell us all. I know it's not.
feelings, right?
Yeah, I know this isn't
I know
true.
it's
Yeah,
true. I know I'm a good person, but I don't
yeah,
feel like I'm a good person.
exactly, exactly.
Your clients say that?
And oh yes, shocking. We have the same ones.
Yeah.
And then it's in those moments of stress, they're going to go with the feeling, right? The feeling is going to organize the behavior in moments of stress or survival. So it doesn't matter what I think in
So
those
hold on,
moments.
that's really important. Hold on,
Hmm.
I'm just trying
Hmm.
to conceptualize that. What I think you're saying is if we can affect you on a visceral level,
Hmm.
then your experiences in the moment are going to change.
Right, because
I won't
yeah,
yell at my kid and explode at him when he spills his milk or his orange juice if I was affected in therapy on a visceral, emotional level. Explain that. You were about to explain
yeah,
that.
because um we're changing what the programming is. Like, I think about it as what's minimized on the desktop of our mind is what's running, that 95% that's minimized is running the 5% that we're aware of. And so when we're in the tissues, when we're in the visceral, when we're in the emotional, we're changing that subconscious or below conscious awareness. We're making that the implicit explicit. And when we do that, then when it goes back down to be minimized on the desktop, it's fundamentally changed. And so I don't have the same level. It's not perfect, right? Of course, but there's more option for choice. And to me, that's really a hallmark of what we're doing in therapy. It's not hopefully helping clients change behaviors, but before that, I want to give them that moment of I get to choose, right?
Mhm.
Because
Yeah,
sometimes yelling and screaming is
even
right.
minimized, even if it's minimized or reduced a little bit,
Mhm.
that in and of itself is a new experience.
Absolutely.
So it gives that space for choice.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, right, then it's a virtuous feedback loop, hopefully.
Right.
And they want to do it some more. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fabulous. Where could people read or learn more about this?
They can look at Jailbreak. They can
Where was
read
that? How weird?
oh,
Jailbreak.
Jailbreak.
Yeah.
Yep, it's
Oh,
on Amazon.
mhm.
They can read the IFS work. They can read Bruce Ecker's The Emotional Brain, Unlocking the Emotional Brain, I think is
And
Bruce's book.
does he talk about polyvagal theory or anything like that?
He talks about the reconciliation piece, but not polyvagal theory. So that's Deb Dana's work is awesome in that arena, very, very approachable. So obviously, as you can hear, I pull from a lot of
Yes, you're
different
putting in,
areas.
and it just
Yeah,
to see again, it's highlighting what we said earlier about
exactly.
the different conceptualization, the different ways that people conceptualize it. So you've
Mhm.
taken what you've learned both in the neurological or and somatic
Mhm.
areas and applying that language to the therapy part.
Right.
Beautiful. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. That was really clear. I appreciate that.
Oh yeah, great. Great.
Can we talk to Yoel? Yoel's the one who
Oh yeah.
about what's going on with the soldiers. Go ahead, Yoel.
Hey, Moshe, thank
Hey.
you. And yes, and thank you, Angela, Dr.
Mm.
Huebner. So yeah, I was going to share a couple of examples of individuals or family that I'm working with
Mhm.
related to Israel, but now I also just wanted to ask some more just basics, a basic question related to what you're talking about. So it's another great guest that Moshe has, and here I relate a lot because I am personally very drawn to EFT and to IFS, and EFT for more, and IFS starting to implement with some success, uh, and EMDR and other trauma somatic work, and um, it seems I first got excited with attachment.
Mhm.
And then it seems all of these things, but especially for sure IFS and EFT, are like Moshe said. Well, one we build upon other modalities, and they're built upon attachment. So I don't think I heard you mention attachment, but I am wondering how much when you're sitting with a client, will you be thinking from an specifically through an attachment lens, and
Mhm.
figuring out attachment style, uh, and then maybe some of the work related specifically to healing attachment styles?
Mhm. Absolutely. I was remiss in not specifically saying attachment, but I absolutely think in terms of attachment. Um, on a couple of different levels. One, I talk to my clients and I firmly believe we have three planes of attachment, and any of those are available to us. At least one of those is available to us all the time. So I think about it in terms of the classic interpersonal, right? That's the one that gets the most play. But then intra, so self depart. But then the third is transcendent, right? Self to God, something bigger, the field, depending on your, on your belief system. But that we've got these different ways to feel attached. And attachment, in the book I write about this, attachment, whether you are securely attached or insecurely attached, and all those different derivations of that, attachment at its core is a way for us to regulate emotion. So that's why the attunement and the connection are so important to begin with, because that seeds what the attachment style of the child becomes. Right? How do I learn to regulate my emotion? Nobody's coming, so I'm going to shut it down. I'm going to hypo arouse. I'm not going to cry, or I'm going to get anxious and hyper arouse, and mom versus nothing. So attachment is huge. I actually did. I run something called an IFS incubation lab, where we talk about different concepts sometimes. And one of them was about attachment. And I talked about attachment as thinking about the different attachment styles as posses of parts, right, from an IFS lens. So you can think about these different parts that come together to form this particular adaptation, whether it's, insecure, anxious, avoidant, whatever. So yes, so absolutely.
Yeah, and then can I follow that up, because you talked about again, Moshe explained working in that 15 minutes or the 5 hours of possibility to really bring about that somatic reconciliation, and that resonates with me. And you also, I know, mention, actually, yeah, I did Google you all, and yes, you mentioned that it can take, I think all therapists, we all say it can take a matter of weeks, or it can take months, or it can take longer. And I've specialized in working with addicts and sex addicts, and with sex addicts, it takes a very long time.
Yeah.
And I have my understanding and theories why, and yet I was wondering if you would comment on your perspective. Why is it that some clients, it takes, even if we get into that moment, we're working in the window of tolerance, we're working in the in that period where we can affect change, it just can take years.
Yeah. One thing I like to look for is there a part that's blocking the progress? Other models would talk about a blocking belief, or a secondary gain of keeping the symptom, whatever that might be. So whichever model you look at, if it's hard to get traction and change, sometimes it is just because there's so much trauma underlying it. So I'm not trying to, it's not, just one and done. But if you keep bumping into no change, is there a part that doesn't want this change to happen? Right. So like the client I talked about earlier, she has a part that says, but this has been so much of my identity. And if I'm not this person, that doesn't need anything and doesn't, what does that mean for who I am? So there's often a part that's blocking progress. Or there's secondary gains. Well, I want to give this up, except I really like the hit of dopamine I get when I look at porn, and I'm not willing to let that go yet. Or I enjoy the chase, and while I know that's bad, there's another part of me that right is not willing to let that go. So sometimes that's a helpful way to think about it, and trying to get all those parts, all those different aspects of the self to talk to each other, and what would they need instead, that sort of thing. Does that track with your experience? Because it sounds like you've done that a lot.
Yeah, I would. Yes, I would go. I won't. I'll leave it for now. But I would love to be able to talk more at some point.
Thank you for the question. That was great.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay. And does anyone else have any questions or comments? Okay. Angela, did we miss anything so far? Is there anything that we didn't cover in terms of the change process before we go to Malka?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. Yeah.
Good. I just wanted to make sure.
Hit the main ones.
Okay. I wanted to make sure we covered it. Malka, go ahead, please.
Yeah. A question. I find that in many patients, things come back to a very core feeling of I'm not good enough. And in one person, it's manifested in tremendous anxiety, in another depression. And they present so differently in personality. Yet, just today, I had 4 of them, so it's fresh, of this conversation going back to, well, criticism led to these feelings, this being in foster care led to whatever the situation at hand. I've been working for years with these people, and we have good, tight relationships. They feel safe. They feel very connected, and they're better. Do we need to be satisfied with there are some childhood wounds that will never go away. And more specifically, I'm wondering, what is your feeling about processing more intensely, recreating, so to speak, the trauma? Might it be a better way to go instead of avoiding it, as a way for the recreation to feel this time when you're in that much pain? You have a validator and a supporter right here who could do that corrective response, which I'm inclined to do, but over the years, I'm wondering if since people keep saying, don't recreate it, don't recreate it. And I'm thinking there's a catharsis to recreating it with a person who you've assuming the person is already extremely validating and supportive and a safe person. Otherwise, of course not. And I'm wondering if you have an approach to those very recalcitrant, deep wounds. I am not good enough. How you would deal with it.
All right, so let's start with the not good enough part, or the not good enough idea. That is certainly not good enough, something wrong with me, or the world isn't safe. Those tend to be, if you break everything down, those tend to be kind of underlying, a lot of them. So the not good enough, two things. One is helping the client understand that the way they came to that belief was the adaptation. In other words, I had to believe I wasn't good enough in order to stay alive in this dysfunctional system, whatever it was. I had to make it.
I think many of them were told.
No, I'm sure they were, right. Either told or that's what they came to believe, right? Either way, it's my fault. So if I bring on that belief, then I can feel shame, but then I feel ownership of it. And then there's some belief of then it's, excuse me, it's on me to change it. So, and that's not good, right? If it's a kid. So it's like, can you help the client see, of course, this is what happened. And from your view now, what do you think that kid needed to hear? Or what do you know about that situation? Can you tell that kid, right? So while that tenderness is open, like, oh my goodness, what did he need to hear? Oh, honey, that wasn't your fault. This was a setup from the beginning. And of course you thought it was your fault. And that made you do what? Like hide. And that was probably right? Because then you didn't get hit, or you got hit less, or right. So really helping them see that belief started your hero's journey. Like that belief in the making you small probably saved you in some way. And now can we help you leave that behind, take that armor off and come into the light? I mean, it's really kind of, to me, it's that epic when we're talking about that level of client. The other thing I look for is, I don't think we have to be satisfied with it's never going to go away. I think the question to me becomes, what are they afraid would happen if they let it go? In other words, who am I without this belief? Am I no longer a victim? Does that mean I have to take responsibility? Are there some secondary gains from holding on to this identity? And I don't mean in a capital V, I'm a victim, I can't be responsible. But really, again, poking around at what's the fear of this? What's preventing you from putting it down? And in fairness, some clients will not put it down. Okay, and we can go at it a million different ways and say this is better than it was. But I'm always really curious about what's sometimes, quite frankly, it's loyalty to family or loyalty to the people, or it's a legacy burden, right? If who am I to suffer what everybody else suffered?
Yeah, in these cases, they're not. It's just,
okay.
I feel like I'm going to say a stubborn ongoing,
Mhm.
how you have, a pain in a foot after
Yeah.
walking, 43 mile, and, you could soak it and whatever, you're going to have a little pain.
Mhm.
And yet I feel for them. I want them to get
Yeah.
100% over this.
Yeah. Well,
So
yeah. And then
I'm
we have to
wondering,
make sure our agenda, is not taking over the session. Like maybe
no,
this
no,
is good enough.
it's
Right.
not.
Of course.
I'm just
Yeah.
wondering, might there be a modality that I'm missing?
Mhm.
You know,
I would give,
up to learning new things.
yeah, IFS and EMDR. That's where I would go. When
Yeah,
the members
that's what I'm
connected to
doing.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay, good.
then your
Yeah.
other question, the only thing I would say about your other question
Yeah.
about recreating it, I think
Mhm.
I think there has to be a level of reactivation, right? But the
Mhm.
tricky part is
Exactly.
a lot of therapists freak out when the client starts to emote and they think abreaction or they think dissociation or it's too much, versus no, they're just feeling what they weren't able to feel back then.
Correct.
And so I think as the therapist, if you're attuned, right, you're tracking, are they right at the top of their window of tolerance, or are they going into dissociation?
Mhm.
And okay, do we have ways to state shift them back? I mean, and to me, that's not scary because I know the client has lived with this for however many years, and most of them, right, unless they're an inpatient, but we're doing, the once a week or twice a week sort of thing, they have the capacity to pull themselves back in, right? So I'm not saying be, not be thoughtful
Of
about it,
course.
but
I
I
find it to be a successful
Mhm.
thing, and so I was wondering, gee, am
Mhm.
I doing something wrong for
no,
40
no,
years?
I think it's this idea
It
of,
works.
yeah, we're trying to go through it, not get stuck in it. And
Yes.
that's the difference. So much of like exposure therapy was just re-traumatizing versus moving through it.
Correct.
And that's very different, right? And that really hinges on how well we as the therapist, right, pull them through it.
And how we're comfortable we are being with someone immersed in pain.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
with experience, it's a very different story than
Right.
when you're wondering what's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, and it's like what we talked about earlier. If you're in the tunnel, so to speak, you're the client and you're re-experiencing that, and you feel my calm presence,
Mhm.
it helps, right? It helps keep you in that window of tolerance. Now we're
Yeah.
not alone. It changes the experience of that trauma. So yes, I'm with you. I agree.
Good.
Okay, let's,
Good
can we
to know.
take one more
Back to
question
work
from
tomorrow.
Natana Gross? Natana, go ahead.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not able to turn on my camera right now. But I just wanted to know if you have any suggestions for specific considerations when you're working with a client who's still living at home with their parents, who are the ones who led them to come to these very deep, painful conclusions about themselves. So the trauma is still real. So yeah, just any thoughts on that?
Well, this is where we have to be systems therapists, right? And we've got to make sure that external environment can support whatever work we're doing internally. And so I think that's a huge consideration, right? And so for some clients, I don't know if you're talking about an adolescent, or an adult child that's moved back home, but there might be in the short term, we have to make it so that they can work internally with what's happening for them, right? How do they get better regulated, and withstand what's happening in the context? So maybe you can say a little bit more. I've got an example, but
So I'm level 2 trained in IFS. So I've been using IFS with a client who's a young adult living at home, moved her home, and just it's definitely more challenging because she, is trying to process some of the old messages that she got, but there's only so much safety when she goes back home, and the anxiety that persists throughout the week of, having these deep places, opened up or revisited.
Mhm.
And the anxiety that she kind of deals with but doesn't really think about is just opened up much more deeply. So some weeks she comes out of therapy with a very, has a very hard time between sessions.
So one thing that I do with clients like that is when I'm working in IFS, is we'll talk about, can the protectors relax back in the safety of this space?
Mhm.
And then I negotiate with the protectors to say, you get to armor back up before you go out my door.
Mhm.
So in other words, we're going to get to the exiles, we're going to get to these tender places, and we're going to witness them and you're going to witness them. And then I want those protectors to come back in so that you're not, like an open wound to the world that you have to go back into.
Got it.
And sometimes that can be really powerful. Sometimes some of my clients don't do any work between sessions and they'll forget between sessions, but I think it's part of that kind of process. In other words, it's not safe contextually for me to think about this outside. Okay, right? As long as we're getting some change in session.
Yeah.
And then the parts start to trust that it's okay for us to go to this tender place because we're not going to leave you exposed.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Great question.
Yes, thank you for that. Any other questions or comments before we turn over to our wrapping up of the night? Anybody? I see there's a question in the chat. Do you want to take a look at it?
Yeah, hold on.
What do you do when clients aren't experiencing relief?
Experience relief for their symptoms. Sorry, cancel. So in IFS, okay, I need to read it. I need to read it out loud. What do you do when clients aren't experiencing relief for their symptoms because they're still in the middle of the IFS or EMDR reprocessing? It takes a while for the healing to happen, and the protectors in IFS don't always cooperate with the negotiations of the self. What helps clients in the meantime? So two things. One, if the protectors aren't going to cooperate, we need to work with them to see what their concerns are and what they would need to feel like they could do that. The other thing is to let the exiles know, or to let the system from an IFS perspective know, or even an EMDR, we may not get all of it out. I think about, we're going to get out the thorn, right? Like we're going in and we're going to try to get this wound out. And sometimes we might not get it all out. But can you imagine, it's like we're letting some of the air out of the balloon. So even though it's not completely resolved, there's a little more space in the system because we've started the reprocessing. And in IFS and EMDR, you've got to make sure there's enough time at the end of the session to close it out, even if you're not done reprocessing. And so you really have to be thoughtful about, if I'm in the middle of an unburdening, like witnessing an unburdening, I better have an eye on the clock to know that I've got enough time to finish that, or I need to pack it up and start it at the beginning of next session. I know we don't always have that luxury, but it's really difficult if you're looking at the clock and you've got 5 minutes. That is not the time to go in and try to do the unburdening. So I hope that kind of helps the question. Part of it is, you're saying we didn't get it all. What does the system need to feel good between now and next session? So that's kind of, how do you work with the system? Another is, make sure you're, as a therapist, monitoring your time appropriately and letting them know, like, we're in the middle of this and we're getting to it, right? I hope that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Angela, do you do any trainings or supervisions or group supervisions? Tell us about it.
Well, so I do trainings different places. Right now it's by invitation. So if anybody is at an agency and they want, to do, I do a lot of staff development sorts of things with people or agencies. I'm not at Cape Cod this summer. I have been in previous summers. And so I also I do consultation for individual therapists or groups. So if you're interested in that, let me know. And that's where I'm at right now.
Amazing.
And I also check out my website for upcoming trainings and things. I post them there as they come up.
Excellent. Don't forget to purchase Jailbreak.
Jailbreak.
Angela, thank you very, very much for doing this for us tonight, for sharing and being so passionate about it. And I found it to be very, very enjoyable. I'm sure others as well. I see Malka is nodding her head. So this was beautiful, beautifully packaged conceptually and clear, crystal clear for everybody to really enjoy and appreciate. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated this. It was great fun. Thanks, everybody.
Good night. Bye-bye. Okay. If anybody wants to stay on to say hi, I love to meet you after the show.